So this week we will discuss one of the most important mitzvahs of Leila Seder, Arba Koises Shel Yain. So most people know, why do we drink Dalet Koises? Keneged Dalet L'Shoines Shel Geula, the beginning of Parshas Ve'era, in the context of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. V'hoitzeisi, v'hitzalti, v'goalti, v'lukachti. So Rashi and the Rashbam, Psochim Tzadik Testament Weiss, the beginning of Perek Arve Psochim, and many other Rishonim and Poskim, that is the most well-known reason for Dalet Koises, Keneged Dalet L'Shoines Shel Geula. But there are various other reasonings and interpretations. Rashi himself brings Daf Kuf Ches Amud Aleph Keneged Gimel Koises Shebiyad Paroi, in the dream of the Sarah Mashkim, and the fourth Kois is Berches HaMazon. And some Rishonim bring, and all these three Ramozim are brought in Yerushalmi, the beginning of Arba Psochim Daf Samaches. Keneged Dalet L'Shoines Shel Por Anut She'osed HaKodesh Baruch Hu Lashkot Et Umes U'olam. But there's a totally different approach. Tois V'Sukkah Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. And I'm quoting, Mistoma lo tiknu dalet koises ele kedei lo yimer aleim, Halel v'Haggadah. There are four brachas that we say b'Leila Seder: Kiddush and Berchos HaMazon, Halal and Haggadah. So a Sukkah Toises says, Mistoma, probably, perhaps. Mistoma lo tiknu dalet koises ele kedei lo yimer aleim, Halal v'Haggadah. And we find this reason in the Ran beginning Arve Psochim. So according to Tois and the Ran, it's not only a remez, Keneged Dalet Koises, Keneged Sarah Mashkin, Keneged Dalet L'Shoines Shel Geula. It is a totally different approach. Each and every one of the four brachas that we say b'Leila Seder should have a kois, and the Dalet Koises are Dalet Koises Shel Bracha. So those are the two fundamental approaches. Brisker Rav and Grizel Rambam has a wonderful arichas of Perek Zayin Hilchos Chometz HaMatzah, in which he discusses Dalet Koises, and he wants to say there's a machloikes in Rishonim. What is the essence of Dalet Koises? Is it the mitzvah to drink Dalet Koises, or the mitzvah is only to say Halal v'Haggadah on the Dalet Koises? Maybe Dalet Koises is just about Amiras Devorim, Kiddush ala Kois, Berchos HaMazon ala Kois, Halal v'Haggadah ala Kois. But Shtiyas HaKois is not a chiyuv. It's no different than any other kos shel bracha. Or no, the mitzvah is to drink Dalet Koises. And the Brisker Rav wants to prove from Toises Tzadik Testament Beis. So Toises is mesupak. Does each and every member of the household need Dalet Koises, or only the Barabayis, only the father, only the one that says the Haggadah? Because b'yamei kedem, in days of yore, bisman HaMishnah v'Gamora, it is clear in Psochim Kuf Tezayin. Bisman HaMishnah v'Gamora, the father, the patriarch, the Godel Abayis, only one person said the Haggadah, and he was moitzi all the others. They were Yoitze B'Shemei HaKohanim. Some great Achronim had that minig, but the more common minig today is everybody says the Haggadah. So Toises is mesupik. Does only the Balabayis need a kois, or does every member of the family need a kois? And the beginning Toises says, why would it be different than Kiddush? But Kiddush, only the one that says Kiddush has a kois, and all the others are yoitzu with him. And the Brisker Rav brings from his great father, Reb Chaim Brisker, that said, what's the kesher? What's the kesher between Dalet Koises and Kiddush? In Kiddush, it's only a kos shel bracha, but Dalet Koises, you need to drink Dalet Koises. So Reb Chaim says, no. From Toises, we could prove that Dalet Koises is just like Kiddush. And Dalet Koises is just about brachas. Lo tiknu Dalet Koises ele lo yimer aleim Halel v'Haggadah. But Toises in the Meskona, Toises concludes, yesh lahachmi, that everybody should have Dalet Koises. And according to Brisker Rav, that is the suffix of Toises. Is Dalet Koises b'Leila Seder just like any other kos shel bracha? Kiddush ala Kois, Berchos HaMazon ala Kois, other brachas that we say ala Kois, and it's all about the brachas, or is it a mitzvah of Shtiyas HaYain? And the Brisker Rav also wants to prove from the Gra that the mitzvah is Amiras HaDevorim. Ketalmed Adan lefnei Rabboisav bekarka. I think it's so unreasonable to assume that anybody would maintain that Dalet Koises is just about Halal v'Haggadah. I think everybody agrees there's a Chiyuv Lishtois Dalet Koises. Because 3 different Gemaras in Perek Arva Psuchim, Kuf Ches Umed Beis, Kuf Tes Umed Beis, Kuf Yud Zayin Umed Beis, the Gemara says, Dalet Koises Tiknu Chachomim Derech Cherus. What does Derech Cherus mean? Derech Cherus is only about Shtia. Shtia Beheseva, Yayin Mozug. Derech Cherus is only about Shtia. There's no such a thing saying Derech Cherus. Even beyond that, the Gemara says, Dalet Koises Tiknachom Derech Cherus Kol Chode V'Chode Liyevet B'Mitzvah, which seems clear. Dalet Koises Tiknachom Derech Cherus. You need to drink Dalet Koises Derech Cherus. And they also were metaken that each and every one of these Dalet Koises has its own mitzvah and its own bracha. Kiddush B'Ech Samazon, Halal v'Haggadah. So Bashkofa HaRishoina, we would say, maybe there's a machloikis, but in reality, Lamaskonas Advorim, Lanias Daiti. Shnei dinim bedalet koises. And this is what the Briskerov actually says at the outset of his discussion, at the outset of his Arichos Gedoyla. Shnei dinim bedalet koises. Kuli alma moidim. We need to drink dalet koises, and that's the concept of derech eres. Kuli alma moidim. We say dalet brochas al dalet koises, and each kois is a koisel brocha. It's a fact. Because exactly where do we drink this dalet koises? It's not everyone his own preference. It's in the Haggadah, it's in the Mishnah. So, everyone agrees. Halal v'Haggadah, you say on dalet koises. You need to drink dalet koises. So what is the suffix of Taisus? Does everyone need dalet koises? Or only the person saying the Haggadah? I would say this. The machlokes is, what is the ikara and what is the tafel? What is the ikara takona and what is a secondary takona? And this is a very interesting question. Was the basic takona to drink dalet koises? And then Chazal looked around and they said, just a moment. Well, we happen to say 4 brachas b'leila Seder, and we need to drink dalet koises anyway. So let's arrange the koises that each kos will have a bracha and each bracha will have a kos. And that is a secondary takona. Or does it go the other way around? Like Tosfos clearly says in Sukkah, Mistoma loy tiknu dalet koises elo kedei lo yimer aleim halal v'Haggadah. So the ikar takana, the original takana, was amiras devorim, to say halal v'Haggadah on a kos. And Kiddush and Bech Samozon goes without saying. But halal v'Haggadah you should say on kos. And the secondary takana was, unlike any other kos shel bracha, b'leila Seder you need to drink the koises as well. But that is the secondary takana. And I think Tosfos Psuchim Tzadik Tes, Omid Beis, L'shitosam, Tosfos Sukkah Lamed Ches Omid Aleph, because in both sources, Tosfos seems to be in doubt. It seems to be a suffix. I'm quoting once again the Tosfos in Sukkah. Mistoma loy tiknu dalet koises el lo yimer aleim halal v'Haggadah mistoma. This indicates that Tosfos sees another possibility. What would be the other mahalach? The other mahalach would be very simple. No. It's not about lo yimer aleim halal v'Haggadah. The tekona is to drink dalet koises. The secondary to tekona is halal v'Haggadah. But the nati of Tosfos is mistoma loy tiknu dalet koises ela lo yimer aleim halal v'Haggadah. And that is the suffix in Psuchim Tzadik Tes. If the ikar tekona is shtiyas hayayin, miltze de pshita that each and every member of the family needs his kos. They all need to drink dalet koises. But if the ikar takana was halal v'Haggadah, then it would be reasonable to say only the balabayas needs a kos. Yes, he will need to drink the kos as well. Unlike other kos shel bracha, it is only chibuv mitzvah that we need to drink the kos of Kiddush or Berachas Hamazon. And not always do we. Berachas Hamazon b'Shalashudis, we don't drink the kos because we can't, but we still say bracha ala kos. So if the ikar takona was to say halal v'Haggadah ala kos, it's a mistava that only the one that says halal vagoda needs to drink the kois, but the others that didn't say halal vagoda don't need to drink dalet koises. There is a mitzvah of shtir, but the mitzvah of shtir rests upon the one that said halal vagoda. And maybe the very fundamental reasoning is, if it is about dalet l'shon shel geula, sara mashkim, dalet koises shel paronas, then the tkona would be drinking. But according to Tosfos and Sukkah, mestoma lo tiknu dalet koises ele lo yimer aleim halav hagoda, that would be the ikar takana, and drinking the kois would be the secondary takana. So Tosfos and Sukkah writes mestoma lo tiknu, and Tosfos and Psochim is mesupik, and in the conclusion Tosfos writes yesh lahachmir, mashma me Tosfos only a chumra. Because ikar das a Tosfos mistoma lo tiknu ele lo yimer aleim halav hagoda, and according to that understanding, it is only the balabayas that would need a kois. That would be my mahalach. I also want to share with you two different drochim, and I think each of them is gewaldig, misyashav al aleiv, v'afal piken, ikar hadvorim, as I just explained in the last few minutes. So what would be the second derech, the second mahalach? Let's go back all the way to the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Arve Psochim Daf Tzadik Tes. Afile oni shebi Yisrael lo yoichal ad sheyesev, v'lo yavchisu lo medalet koises afilu min hatam chui. The tam chui is a communal fund to give out food to the needy and the desperate. So even those deserve to get dalet koises from the tam chui. And the Lashon of Tosfos is a suffix. Ha'im noisnim rak labalabayis or lakol echad v'yechad. And it's mash miktsas b'divrei Tosfos that the question is, do we supply from the communal fund, from the tamchui, only to the balabayis or to each and every one of them? So we do not find this halacha that we need to give an oni shebi Yisrael only by persume nisa. And Tosfos makes this very clear on the spot in the Mishnah. In Arve Psochim, Tosfos asks, why do we give dalet koises from the tamchui? We don't give lulovim and esrogim from the tamchui. We don't give bigdei Shabbos or shofar from the tamchui, or ner Chanukah. So Tosfos writes, mishum persume nisa. And I think it is the combination of two facts. On one hand, it's food, it's drinks. The tamchui doesn't give ner Chanukah, doesn't give shofar, doesn't give lulovim. The tamchui is about food. But on the other hand, the tamchui is about giving basic sustenance to the poor and their families. There's no real need for dalet koises. Poor people shouldn't be drinking dalet koises all year round. But it is persume nisa. So food, even though this food is necessary only l'kayim mitzvah, but it is also persume nisa, and that's why we give. I said before Shnei Dina b'dalet koises, and it is clear to me. That is a Yesoid Godel. Shnei Dina b'dalet koises. Shtiyas HaKoises and Halal Vagod ala kois. But the question is, which of the two is associated with persume nisa? And I have a very fundamental argument, and I think it's Poshut and Borul, which is, Shtiyas HaYayin has nothing to do with persume nisa. Persume nisa is always for others, not for yourself. And persume nisa in its very essence is associated with sight and hearing. We light Ner Chanukah for others to see. We read the Megillah B'tzibur for others to hear. And that is the only form of persume nisa. It is either for others to see or for others to hear. So Ner Chanukah Pesach Beisim Avechitz for others to see, Mikra Megillah for others to hear. There's no such a thing eating and drinking as persume nisa. So the persume nisa of dalet koises is Halel v'hagoda ala kois. That is the persume nisa. And the kois enhances and enriches the Persuma Nissa of Halal V'Hagoda, and that is the Persuma Nissa from Dalet Koises. And maybe that is the Svara of Tosfos. Yes, everyone needs to drink Dalet Koises. That's Poshut. Each and every member of the family. That is beyond doubt. But when we supply for the poor and the desperate Dalet Koises from the Tamchui, maybe that is only for the father, for the one that says Halal V'Hagoda ala Kois. The others, if you don't have your potul, but Mishum Persuma Nissa, we supply from the Tamchui. And Persuma Nissa has nothing to do with drinking the Koises, but rather Halal V'Hagoda ala Kois. And I think this pshat is so mistaver, it makes so much sense. But I think in the Hemshech of Tosfos, Neret Fei, that the Suffolk of Tosfos is not only when we supply from the Tamchui, but the Suffolk of Tosfos is the very essence of Mitzvahs Dalet Koises. Is it upon each and every member, or only the father or the one that says Halal V'Hagoda ala Kois? And that is why Nera Ikar, the first Mahalach that I just shared with you a few minutes ago. Mahalach number 3, which is also extremely misyashav alalev. And it brings us to a fundamental definition of Shomea Ka'oina. So in the yeshiva world, we know of the big machlokes between the Chazon Ish and the Beis Halevi. So the Beis Halevi says, by Birchas Koyanim, it's not shaykh to say Shomea Ka'oina. All the Koyanim olam leduchen, they all turn around facing the people, but only one would say Birchas Kohanim, and all the other Kohanim would be Yotzei B'Shomea Kohanim. The Beis Halevi says, no, it wouldn't work. And why not? Because in Sotah Lamed Ches we learn that Birchas Kohanim needs to be B'Koil Ram. Shomea Kohanim Amru, Shomea Kohanim B'Koil Ram Lo Amru. The Tzafnes Paneach that Rogat Shabbos says a similar svara in a totally different area, Mikro Megillah. So the Tzafnes Paneach comes to explain what is the origin and what is the reasoning of the minhag that each and every member of the congregation says a seres b'nei homen on his own, and we're not yoitzu with the Bal Koira. So the Tzafnes Paneach says it's a Gemara in Megillah that you need to say a seres b'nei homen b'neshima achas. Shomea Kohanim Amru. Shomea Kohanim b'neshima achas lo amru. So the common denominator, the tzad shova between what these two gedolim, these two giants say is, yes, we say Shomea Kohanim, but when you need a special form and a special style and a special way of saying things, you cannot say Shomea Kohanim. Comes along the Chazon Ish, he doesn't quote the Tzafnes Paneach, but he brings the Beis Halevi and he is doiche devorav and he disagrees. And the Chazon Ish in his Kuntres on Shomea Kohanim, or Chaim Semenyuteh says, I will explain what the Beis Halevi says and why I think I disagree and I defer. So the question is, how do we understand Shomea Kohanim? Is it when I hear it is as if I say these same brachas? I say the same kriya. I want to use my words. Is Shomea Kohanim saying that there are two different ways to daven and to bench and to read? One could daven with his vocal cords, with his mouth. One could daven with his inner ear. One could daven by saying, and one could daven by hearing. And it's just as good. And Shomea Kohanim means when I hear a bracha, it is as if I said the bracha. He's davening with his mouth. I'm davening with my ears. And if this is the way we understand Shomea Kohanim, then the Beis Halevi makes sense. The Tzafnes Paneach makes sense. Because one could be koira b'kol ram. There's no such a thing as listening b'kol ram. You could listen to loud voices, but you can't listen loudly. You could read b'neshima achas. You can't listen b'neshima achas. Because your vocal cords are associated with your breathing. But your ear has nothing to do with your breathing. So if Shomea Kohanim is pshat, that my listening is defined as davening on my own, then the Beis Halevi is right, that Sovnas Maneach is right, but the Chazon Ish says, I think it's a misinterpretation. I think it's a wrong understanding. Shomea Koina means when I listen to him, I'm Yoitze with his brachas. I am Yoitze with his kriya. It is not as if I said the same. No. It is only he that said the brachas, but I could be Yoitze with his brachas, and therefore, if he is saying B'Koil Ram and he is reading B'Neshiyah Ma'aches, that is sufficient for me as well. And maybe that is the machloikis or the suffix in Toises. Does only the Balkoira need a kois, or everybody that's listening? According to the Beis Halevi, everyone needs a kois, because we're all saying Halal Va'agoda. He is saying with his mouth, we're saying with our ears. But we're all part of the mitzvah of Halal V'Agoda and Kiddush HaBerch Zamozan. So each and every one of us needs a kois. According to the Chazon Ish, no. We're Yaitzu with him. He is the only one that says Halal V'Agoda. And that is why he is the only one that needs the kois. So Minchas Osher, Madura Kame Bamidbar Simen Yud Gimel. I think I spoke about this a few different places in my Sforim. And I think the most recent compilation is in, I think it's in Minchas Osher Moyadim, either Chelik Aleph or Chelik Beis. I think it's Chelik Beis. I apologize many times. There are many Sforim that I remember far better than the Minchas Osher. I remember the Ktsois HaChoshen better than I remember Minchas Osher, for a very simple reason. Ktsois HaChoshen to me is Gersa di Ankusa. Minchas Osher is not. When I was young, there was no Minchas Osher. And I say this just as Musar to all the youngsters that are listening to me. Al toy melekisha efne eshna. Even if you learn all your life, take advantage of Yemea Bacharus. What I learned 50 years ago, I remember up to this very moment. What I learned 3 months ago, I have already forgotten. So don't wait. Don't wait till you're going to be an old man. Take advantage of the wonderful years of youth. So, Minchas Osher, Bamid Yud Gimel, but I think the most recent version is in Moyadim. I brought 35 sources, Lakan u Lakan, to support the understanding of the Chazon Ish or the Beis Halevi. And after the 35 sources, I offered a totally different interpretation of Shomei HaKohen, Shaloka Beis Halevi, Shaloka Chazon Ish, which to me is even more appealing. But this is for another opportunity. Another interesting comment. So the Beis Halevi says, Shomei HaKohen doesn't work by Berchas Koyanim. Shalas Teshuvos Reishis Bikurim Simen Daled. The Reishis Bikurim was Rebbe Tzalal HaKohen, the Av based in Vilna. And in Simen Daled he tells a story. I visited Trieste in Italy, and I had a big surprise. In Shul, by davening, obviously it was a Sephardi minyan, because Ashkenazim don't duchen in Chutz La'aretz. They asked me to duchen and to be moitzi all the other koyanim. I was taken aback. I was surprised. Why is that Reishis Bikurim? But he writes, he was a tremendous ilui, a big goen. So it occurred to me, according to the minig of Trieste in Italy, I have pshat in the Mishnah Megillah Daf Chov Daled. Hamafti benovi hu podes al shema hu over lefnei hateva v'hu noises kapov. So if a person was oila just for the haftorah, so it's not as mechubed as being oila leTorah shivekruim, so they compensated him, and they gave him a few other kibudim. Podes al shema v'moitzi es atzibo b'kirei shema over lefnei hateva v'moitzi es atzibo b'tefillah v'hu noises kapov. And the Tosis Yom Tov and many other Rishonim and Achronim deal with the difficulty. What does it mean, hu noises kapov? Don't all the koyanim have a chiyuv of berchas koyanim? So Rebbe Tzalal writes, according to the minig of Trieste and that shul, maybe pshat is, he has moitzi all the others with berchas koyanim. Now, I don't think Rabbeinu HaKadosh in the Mishnah had in mind the minig of Trieste in Italy. This is a strange minig. Minhagim we should find in the Gemara and the Rishonim, in the classical Sforim on Minhagim. This minig is not found anywhere. Until 120 years ago in Reishis Bikurim Trieste in Italy doesn't make sense. But even if the minig is a minig vasikin, doesn't fit into the Mishnah because the Mishnah says, Hu noisei eskapov. According to the Reishis V'Kurim, the Mishnah should say, Hu mevorech es ha'am. Because all the Kohanim need to be ordered to duchen, v'lasetet kapayim. So why does the Mishnah say, Hamafti benovi hu noisei eskapov? I think I saw many years ago in Mincha Charevo, Mesechet Soiter, a Pinchas Epstein, the Flamet Ches. I think he tells a story that Rav Avram Doiv Shapira, the Rav of Kovna, showed the Reishis Bekurim to the Beis HaLevi, and the Beis HaLevi Chazar boy. I need to check it. But even if it is in the Mincha Charevo, to me it seems so likely Beis HaLevi was a takaf. Why would he retract because of a strange minig in Trieste? I don't know. So anyway, that would be the third pshat in the Suffolk of Toisus. The Briskerov has another chiddush, and he writes, the psak of the Ramot Tov Pei Gimel Sifalav, then B'shas Atchak, one could be yoitza. Dalet koises with Chamar Medina, if he doesn't have wine. That is only one din of Dalet Koises, not the second din. Chamar Medina, you could be Yoitza, Halal Vagod ala Kois, Kiddush ala Kois, Berch Zamazan ala Kois. But the mitzvah of Shtia needs to be only wine and not Chamar Medina. So there's a story. In the days of World War I, in our society, people know very little about World War I. And that is because we all know so much about the Holocaust, which was part of World War II. But what most people don't know, that World War I was also decimating and horrible for Eastern European Jewry. Hundreds of kehelas were uprooted and destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of Jews went into exile, roaming from one town to the other, from one city to the other. Cities were overwhelmed, and many Gedolim left their communities which were destroyed. So Mishpachat Soloveitchik Haroim Meimo, in the days of World War I, were just wandering. And wine was extremely expensive and difficult to achieve. And the question was, should we buy Chamar Medina and all of us could have Dalet Koises, or should we buy wine and only one of us will have Dalet Koises? And that was a machlokes between the Briskerov and his brother Reb Moshe Soloveitchik. Reb Moshe argued, we buy Chamar Medina, and everybody is Yotzei the mitzvah in a somewhat b'di'evid fashion, but at least everybody will have Dalet Koises. The Briskerov says, no, we should buy wine, and one of us should have Dalet Koises. L'chayre Reb Moshe definitely was right. And we could prove from Hilchas Chanukah the dinam of Dalet Koises. The Mishnah Brura in Chanukah quotes, if a person has enough oil, enough wicks, he has everything needed to be Mahadran Mina Mahadran, but his neighbor, his friend, another person has nothing. You need to forego your Mahadran to be Mizak another person, at least to be Makayim, the Ikara Mitzvah, the fundamental mitzvah. So why would one family member have yayin, and he'll have Dalet Koises lechatchila, and all the others would have nothing? You need to forego wine, and you all will have Chamar Medina. But the Briskerov l'shitosai, and that's the spark of genius. So the Briskerov says you can't be yotzei shtiyas Dalet Koises with Chamar Medina, only halal vagoda, brocha ala kois. Brocha ala kois, one could be moitzi all the others. And therefore it is preferable to have wine. At least the Balabayas, the Rosh HaMishpocha, would have a lachatchila de kashtiyas hayayin, and he's moitzi all the others with Hanal Agod ala Kois, because you can be Makayim the mitzvah of Shtia only with wine. Halacha l'maisa, I think Reb Moshe was right. Because Pashtas v'stimes Loshen Harama, and the source of this halacha is in Maharil, and both say, B'shas atchak, you yoytze Dalet Koises with Chamar Medina. That means your yoitza Dalet Koises in its entirety with Chamar Medina. Not half, not 50%, not Halal Vagod ala Kois, excluding Shtiyas Hayayin. Kol ki hai gavna havelei lefarish v'lo listom. And therefore, the Maril de Ramo prove Shasat Chak, you yotza the entirety of Dalet Koises, and that is why it is preferable. Everybody has Chamar Medina, and everybody is Makayim their mitzvah. Not one should be Makayim a mitzvah lechatchila. So today I think we had an extremely interesting and fascinating shiur, as b'siyata d'shmaya we usually have. So let me go all the way back to the beginning of the shiur. Kineged daled l'shoynes shel geula. Haggadah shel Pesach Minchas Osher is a vertel, but a very good vertel. And I ask, why is it that between kos number 1 and kos number 2, between kos number 2 and kos number 3, you could eat, you could drink, no kpeda. But between 3 and 4, you cannot eat, you cannot drink, you cannot make a hefsek. There are so many of our brethren that, to our dismay, are still not in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's tent. And they still do not fill their hearts ba'ahavosoi v'yirosoi, in the love and fear and awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So many of our fellow Jews would be happy with the first 3 Lashonos of Geula. They feel less comfortable with number 4. V'hoitzeisi kein, v'itzalti, definitely, v'goalti, let it be, v'lokachti eschem lila am v'yisu lachem le'elokim, has less appeal to them. They would be satisfied drinking 3 kaises. They would be content with 3 Lashonos of Geula. Number 4 to them is less appealing. But we want to prove that all the first 3 are only an introduction and a way to get to number 4. And that is the tachlis of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Velokachti eschem lila am, v'hoyisi lochem le'elokim. And that is why there is no kpeda making a hefsek between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. But v'hoitzeisi v'tzalti v'galti is only because to arrive at the final destination, velokachti eschem lila am, v'hoyisi lochem le'elokim, and only then v'heveisi, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring us back to the promised land. There's one pasuk that we quote 4 times in the Haggadah. And if we quote this only pasuk 4 times, it must convey a very special message in the Haggadah. Which is that pasuk? Ba'avur ze osu Hashem li b'tzeisi mi'mitzrayim. We quote this pasuk to the Rosh, we quote it to the She'eni Yadei Elishal. B'chol dor v'dor chayav u'dem l'risatz v'keli yotzim mi'mitzrayim shene'emar ba'avur ze osu Hashem li. So what is so unique and special and so important with this pasuk? Rashi explains, Ba'avur ze osu Hashem li b'tzeisi mi'mitzrayim kedei she'akayem mitzvotav. We were redeemed from Mitzrayim in order to observe HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah and to do our duty in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ba'avur ze kedei she'akayem mitzvotav. So when the Rosh says, Mohu avoidu azois lochem, and the Yerushalmi, the Sprach, the words of the Rosh are far more disturbing. One of the earliest Dorim I remember, and I'm not so proud of it. Not so proud that that is what stuck in my mind. But I was a very little boy, and my father, Zechroin Levrocha, Zeichat Tzadik Levrocha, was always so friendly and outgoing, and he was a people's person, and we always had guests. And once he had a non-frum Jew to share our Seder. When that Jew sat down to the Seder table, he had a radiant smile. And from minute to minute, his expression became somewhat more dismayed. He thought he's coming to a meal. And my father was a big Yidui, and my older brothers were all great boys. And my father, every year by the Seder, used to say Pshetlach and Pilpulim and Vortim and Vertlach and another Pshat and another Pshat of this person. So when are we going to eat? You know, we're hungry. Okay, so the matzahs were brought in, and he thought, Volatzia and Goyal, okay, we finally got over this torture and we're going to start eating. No, my dear friend. Shnei Kezei Matzah, Moror, Koirech, By the time we got to the meal, he was totally worn out. And I remember I sat across him, and I had so much rachmanis. If I wouldn't be ashamed, I would tell my father, okay, cut it out. You know, you have a guest there. He is so hungry. So the Rosh says, Ma torach hazeh she'atem matrichim aleinu b'chol shana v'shana. And we say, is this a burden for you? Is this so difficult? Don't you love your matzah? Don't you love your maror? Don't you love your koirach? It's all about matzah. It's all about Pesach. It's all about maror. It's all about mitzvahs. And then comes the turn of the she'eni yodei alishon. We made such an effort. Machalkin kloyes v'goyim, madbilim, oikrem es hashulchan, kedei sheyesh'alu atinoikes, to no avail. Nothing helped. He has nothing to ask. And we say, sweet little boy, Chamud, you have nothing to ask. So obviously you're not going to be a great philosopher. You lack some curiosity. So you don't know how to ask, but you know how to eat. So let's eat. Let's eat Pesach, let's eat matzah, let's eat more. That's more important than anything you could ask. This very posik that is toichocha to the Rasha is chizuk to the she'enu yedei alishon. And then we move fast forward in the Haggadah. Yochel meresh chodesh talmid lo yime ba'av ezeh osu Hashem li b'shor sheyesh matzav amora menochem lefonechem. We tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim when we have the matzah and morah because the two are so closely associated, the two sides of the same coin. Because the Kodesh Baruch Hu Yitzionim Mitzrayim kedei shakayem mitzvotav. We should eat matzah, we should eat Pesach, we should eat morah. Kili b'nei Yisrael avodam avodehem asher etzeisi yoisa miyeretz Mitzrayim kedei shetekablu malchusi aleichem, says Rashi. And that is why b'chol doyer v'doyer chai avodam liris asatzvukeli. Who's the sheyotzem Mitzrayim? It needs to be personal. It's about you, and you need to try to feel and try to imagine you were redeemed for Eretz Mitzrayim. And why is that so important? Why don't we find by Chag HaSukkos b'chol doyer v'doyer chai avodam liris asatzvukeli hu yoshev ba'anana Yaakov? No, we don't find that because Yetzias Mitzrayim is about Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim. And Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim is always personal. You're not supposed to be Makabel Malchus Shemayim on others. It's about you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you. And therefore, you are the one that needs to feel I, because you are the one that is required and expected to be Makabel Ol Malchus Shemayim. So this pasuk is the most important message in the Haggadah. Ba'avur zeh osu Hashem li b'tzeisi mitzrayim kidei shakayem mitzvotav. And all of the Dalet Lishonos Shel Geula, the most important is Achroin Chaviv Velokachti eschem li la'am. So the Chassidish Svarim say, the greatest of the Tanoim, until Achroin HaTalmidim, the youngest of their disciples, felt, Rabbi Seinu, we finally got there. Higia Zman Kriya Shema Shachlis. It is time to be Makaber Ol Malchus Shemayim and to say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So we shared some thoughts on the Seder. And I think this Leil Seder, we will also thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for his chasadim. At least in Eretz Yisrael, we're coming out of this pandemic. Things are looking much better. We still should be important. And I am aware that other places in the world things aren't as good. In Europe and many countries there's a new surge. In America things are going slowly, maybe surely, but slowly. But we need to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for sparing us the pain, the suffering, and we have so much to thank for. Higia Zman Kriya Shema Shel Shachas. And besides giving thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we need to rededicate ourselves to Avodas Hashem, to Kiyum HaMitzvahs. Ki ameitzeichem me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu neflois. We should be zoche b'kora b'yameinu to be as Moshiach tzedkenu an binyan beis hamikdash b'mehero v'yomeinu amen.